Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying your meal. As we are running slightly behind schedule, I suggest we hear right now about the bank's on-the-ground result with Simon Mizrahi. Simon is the director of the Quality Assurance and Results Department of the AFDB. And please, do pay attention, for Simon has a surprise for you. Simon, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anne. Pleasure to be here.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Just before lunch, we heard Vice President Boama and Pierre van Petegem talk to us about the bank's robust financial situation. But let me tell you this. As a development bank, we don't measure our success by the profits we make, the money we spend, or even by the number of projects we implement. We measure our success by the lasting changes we bring to the lives of the people of Africa. Take Domina Dusabe, pictured here. Now, Domina owns a small but growing farm tucked away in the foothills north of Kigali. And this mother of five has a very simple morning routine. Waking up early, tending to chores around her home, and, of course, milking her 3 cows. Domina, like many other farm owners, has been chosen to participate in Rwanda's 1 cow per poor family program, a nationwide initiative that donates dairy cows to poor families around the country. Thanks to this initiative, co-funded by the government of Rwanda and the African Development Bank, dairy farmers like Domina have, in average, increased their annual revenue by $2,500 a year. And this is just one example out of 820 operations that the bank currently funds. Now, what we want at the African Development Bank is to make sure that each and every one of our operations is as successful as this one in creating economic opportunities for Africans across the continent. The question is, how do you do that? There's no simple answer. We have no panacea. But one way of doing it is by tracking our performance using what we call a results measurement framework. Now, put very simply, the results measurement framework helps us answer 3 fundamental and interconnected questions. The first one is, what development progress is Africa making? Second, how well is the bank contributing to Africa's development? And third, is the bank as an organization fit for purpose? In the course of today's presentation, I'll be providing you with answers to all 3 of these questions. Let's start with the first one. What development progress is Africa making? Now, you'll have heard it most of this week. The headline story for these annual meetings and for our report is very much about the question of Africa's growth. With 9 out of 15 fastest growing countries now based in Africa, this continent is set to become a new pole of global growth. And the good news is that today there is every prospect that Africa will continue to grow at a very high pace. Just have a look at the chart in front of you. It's a sort of a speedometer, a very special speedometer in the sense that what we measure here is the average rate of Africa's growth. And in 1990, as you can see, the average rate of growth across the continent was 3.4%. There were only 7 countries in 1990 that grew at more than 7%. Now, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to put the time machine on. I'm going to put the clocks forward, and let's see what happens. Now, as I press on the button, you see that time is moving forward, but also is the rate of growth. And in fact, by the time we reach 2015 and 2018, we expect that the average growth rate will just be shy of 6%, 5.7% in fact. 22 African countries will be growing by more than 6% between 2015 and 2018. And what this does is that it's creating its own economic momentum. But growth isn't just a number. And as President Kaberuka noted earlier this week, you cannot actually eat GDP. Growth is about improving people's lives. It's about creating the economic and social conditions that will allow more Africans to live longer and more meaningful lives. And if you just consider what we've achieved in the last 20 years, it's quite incredible. Whether we consider life expectancy, or school enrollment, or infant mortality, what we have witnessed is that Africa has made tremendous strides in improving the living conditions of the African people. And this is only part of an increasingly complex story, fascinating story of development that we discuss in greater detail in this year's Annual Development Effectiveness Review. But now it's time to come to answer the second question. How well is the bank contributing to Africa's development? Now, to answer that question, I think we should start by focusing on some of Africa's development challenges. Now, in this presentation, we can only provide a cursory overview of these challenges, but we think that there are 3 in particular that really stand out. The first, of course, is the question of inequality. While Africa is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, it's also the region where there is the most inequality. In fact, 6 out of 10 of the most unequal countries are in Africa. Second challenge is the infrastructure gap. And this has been discussed in the previous presentation, but let me just provide you with one single example that I think illustrates this infrastructure gap. And it's this. It's cheaper for a country like Nigeria to import its food from Peru than it is from a neighboring country like Cameroon. And the third important challenge we need to talk about is sustainable growth. And to illustrate this challenge, we've seen, you might not recognize it, but it's actually a map of Lake Chad. And what I think Lake Chad tells us very eloquently is that Africa's development prospects are inextricably linked with good stewardship of natural resources. We at the African Development Bank think very strongly that Africa cannot afford to grow now and clean up later. Our 10-year strategy is what guides us in addressing not only the 3 challenges I've just talked about, but many other challenges as well. And it has 2 strategic objectives: inclusive growth and the transition to green growth. To meet these objectives, we're taking actions in 5 priority areas. And taken together, these actions aim to transform the African continent. To meet these objectives, what we do is we assess our performance against this strategy. So the question is, how well are we actually doing? Well, I think to start with, it's important to remind ourselves that the African Development Bank is already investing massively in Africa's transformation. We have $22 billion invested across the African continent aimed at improving the conditions of Africans in many different parts of the region. And to help us track each of these investments, what we have done is we have innovated and elaborated a special tool that we call Map Africa. Map Africa is a web-based application that allows all of us to get a better understanding of how the African Development Bank is funding development in different parts of the country. And this special initiative, Anne talked earlier on about a surprise, and this is the surprise. This initiative we're launching today, here, this afternoon, at lunchtime, right now, in front of you. And for this special occasion, we've prepared a very short film, a video clip, that explains much better than I will what Map Africa is all about. Film, please. Hope you enjoyed the film. I think one of the things the film tells us is how strongly we feel about our accountability to our stakeholders. But one of the things that really matters to us is to make sure that we're in a position to track the performance of each of our operations. And when we do that, what it tells us is that 71% of our operations achieved or exceeded that target, their targets. In other words, our operations deliver the goods. But don't take my word for it. Take the US Treasury's word. Because I don't know whether you know, but every year the US Treasury gives awards to the MDBs whose operations have done the best job at demonstrating their impact on development. And in 2013, the African Development Bank has the highest number of development impact awards and is the only institution that has won 2 awards in the same year. Quite an achievement. But what really matters is how we go about sustaining that level of performance over time. And that's a question I'd like to answer in the last section of my presentation. Is the bank fit for purpose? Maybe another way of saying the same thing is to ask ourselves what it means to be an effective development organization. Well, for us, that means 3 things. It means managing all of our operations very effectively, 2, it means delivering the best value for money for our stakeholders and our clients. And 3, it means attracting and retaining the best professional talent available. So how well do we perform? That's what I'll answer in my next slide. Well, what our results measurement framework tells us is that 70% of our performance indicators are on track. However, let me tell you this. In an industry, in a business as complex as ours, we cannot afford any complacency. This is why we discuss extremely candidly the areas where we can do better, the areas where we have weaknesses, so that we keep on moving in the right direction. And looking ahead, we believe there are 3 areas that warrant the African Development Bank's very special attention. The first is managing our return to Abidjan. And this year is a very, very special year for the African Development Bank, not only because we're celebrating our 50th anniversary, but also because this is the year we return to our statutory home in Abidjan. And no other organization, I think in modern history, has managed successfully to move its headquarters between 2 cities in the space of a little bit more than 11 years, and in the process has strengthened its position, has strengthened its business. If we've achieved that, it's because we pay very special attention to our most valuable asset, and that is the staff of the African Development Bank. And what our last survey tells us, our last staff survey tells us, is that 69% of all of the bank staff believe there is no better organization to work for than for the African Development Bank. I think that's a prize that we take very at heart. And finally, we would like the next 50 years to be as successful as the last 50 years. And what our report tells us is that after a decade of growth, Africa today is challenging the old narratives of dependency and poverty, and it's writing a new chapter of change and opportunity. Looking ahead, the African Development Bank will continue to be the leading development institution in this continent. We will continue to be funding infrastructure so that we can help link citizens from Cape Town to Cairo into a single economic space. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Simon, for this brilliant presentation. And if you want more details on the matter, read this, the Annual Development Effectiveness Review, which is available here today. And ladies and gentlemen, I know dessert is coming. However, if you hurry, you can still catch the President's session, which is about the leadership for the Africa we want, in presence of President Kaberuka, President Kagame, or Mo Ibrahim, among others. Again, many thanks for your attention. Have a nice day.